Okay, so we're drilling the tap hole here, and we're going in until we hit the blonde wood. See that coming out there? And if we pull the tap back just a little and show the wood itself is kind of wet, and you can see the sap itself coming out of the hole. So the hole is on a slight upward angle so that it'll drain easily, and we're tapping the tap in now. And we can see that it's dripping out of there quite nicely. So we're going to go ahead and attach the hose. And we're not using any vacuum on our hoses. We're just using them to get to the buckets so that we don't have to hang the buckets on the taps themselves. And we put our buckets inside these big wooden crates because that keeps them from blowing away or tipping over. And our solution to putting a tap on it is just aluminum foil this year because we don't know where the taps went. So we just duct tape aluminum foil over the top to keep the rainwater and the debris out as much as possible. One of the things you want to consider when you're putting the taps on your buckets, however your taps are, is to slant the buckets so that rainwater runs off the bucket and onto the ground rather than running into the opening of the bucket. So you can see on this one the whole bucket is tilted slightly downhill to the right so that the rainwater, when it falls on top, will run off to the right instead of to the left and into the bucket. Another thing to consider if you use a tap like ours that is not easily removable is that we have to pour the sap out of this opening every time. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you put the opening on that bucket so that when you have your handle, you can actually tip it easily instead of putting the opening, for example, right here, would make it difficult for us to tip this bucket. One thing people often ask about is how do you know when it's time to set your taps? The trees will flow best when the temperatures are above freezing during the daytime and sunny, and below freezing at nighttime. That's when you're going to get your strongest runs. So when you see that you have some weather coming up like that, you want to set one of your taps in and then keep an eye on it. When it starts to flow, it's time to set the other taps. And that way you'll be able to troubleshoot if anything's going wrong. You know the sap is flowing, and if it's not coming out of one of the taps that you just set, then that means that there's a problem with the set and you can troubleshoot right away. To watch out for when you're setting your taps that can make them not flow properly is to make sure that you get all of the wood shavings out of your hole. If you don't get all of the wood out of the hole, you'll end up with a tap that's clogged full of wood shavings. And of course, no sap is going to go through that into your bucket. The wood shavings out of your hole, the tap will get clogged up with them and it won't flow through there. Another thing to think about is where previous years have been tapped. You don't want to tap too close. And this one here's this year's hole. And then from, 3 or 4 years ago, we have a hole over here. And they're several inches apart. You don't want to put them too close together, at least a few inches. But the best bet is to try to tap on opposite sides of the tree or nearly opposite sides of the tree every year, so that you're on, say, the southeast one year and the southwest next year and the southeast again the following year. And it's best if the holes are somewhat south-facing because then they get more sunlight. And the more sunlight you get, the better off you're going to be in terms of sap production. Another thing that seems to affect sap production, and there's some argument about this, some people say it doesn't matter, but if you want to try to put your tap above a root or below a large branch, in theory, the large roots and the large branches will be producing more sap than places where you're not near a large root or a large branch. However, again, you're trying not to get the holes too close together from the previous years, so trying to tap always near a root or a branch is not going to be possible. The biggest thing is to make sure that you're far enough from old holes so that you're not tapping into scar tissue. You have a tap that's leaking and most of your sap is going down the tree instead of out of the tap itself, you can take a small thin piece of aluminum foil, fold it up, wrap it around the end of your tube, and then tap it back in. So you're basically creating a little plug around the outside edge of your tap. So you're putting the foil around the tap at the edge and then tapping the tap into the tree, and that creates this little foil plug that allows the sap to come out the tap itself instead of running down the tree as it had been doing in this case. And then of course that little foil plug can come right back out when you take the tap out at the end of the season. We're getting ready to boil sap, and I just wanted to show you our setup here in case anybody's interested in learning how to do it. I have here a little oven that I made. It's sort of like a rocket stove. All it is cinder blocks, and we've pounded in some rebar so that it holds the cinder blocks in place, and a couple bricks on the end. The wind actually comes so that it's at an angle to the wind. So what that does is it creates a suction that can keep your fire going really hot. And we'll show you why that's important in just a minute. So now we have our evaporator pans on our rocket stove, and you can see that we have the temperature at a rate where it's evaporating for sure, but it's not really boiling. You don't want to get it boiling hard or you're going to caramelize your sugars and end up with really super dark syrup. Unless you want super dark syrup, then you can boil it really hard. If you look towards what would be the downwind side of the stove, we have the branches sticking out, and the fire is in underneath the evaporating pans, and we can feed these branches in as we go. And because the wind is coming from the opposite direction, it sort of blows the fire out the mouth of the stove, and then we push it back underneath, and then it moves it out and we push it back underneath. And then on the other end here we have these fire bricks that we can add or take away depending on how much airflow we want going through our stove. So this is on the upwind side of the stove, again with the understanding that the wind is not going directly through the stove but at an angle to it, more like that. So that coming across that way. All right, and so we're just going to spend the rest of the day hanging out here watching the sap almost boil. This is the hardest part about boiling down the sap, is that once you got everything going on the fire, you got to chill out and wait. So over the past several hours, we've let this boil down, and we've been adding more sap to it as we go. And in the bottom of the pans now, you can see that there's some dusty looking stuff. That's called niter. And the niter is from minerals that are in the sap that then precipitate out when it boils down. Also, because we're boiling over an open fire, there is ash that comes up around the edges, and so bits of ash will get into there. The best thing to do is when you're done boiling, before you put it into your jars or whatever you're going to do with it, you would want to run it through a filter. And I have found the best thing to use for a filter is a white cotton chef's towel, but make sure that you don't wash it with fabric softener, or all of your syrup will taste like fabric softener. You want to wash it with just plain water and rinse it clean, and then go ahead and filter your boiled sap through that. Okay, so you've boiled and boiled and boiled outside, and the reason we do it outside is because it takes 40 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup. So if I'm going to make a gallon of syrup, I have to get rid of 39 gallons of water. And doing that in your kitchen can be incredibly messy. Not only is it 39 gallons of water that's going into your walls and ceiling and everything else, it's also going to have some sugar content as it evaporates. So it's going to be sticky. Everything gets sticky if you do this inside. So I do everything outside, and then when I'm ready to actually make the syrup, I bring it inside. And this is actually ready to be put in jars as syrup. And I know that because when I take a silver spoon or stainless steel spoon, and I put the syrup on it. If I just give it a minute to start to cool, you can see on the top of the syrup here, it's not showing really well. You see those bubbles, those are actually like little grains. And you can also see that it's coating the spoon as I move it. I'm going to go ahead and dump it off the spoon so you can see the thickness of it on the spoon. And that's really what you're looking for if you don't have a candy thermometer, is this thickness and viscosity. You can also see it on the top of the actual syrup itself in the pan. There's this viscosity. It kind of forms almost a crust on top of the liquid when it's ready. Not quite a crust, almost a crust. If you have a candy thermometer, you need to get it around 220 degrees. When it's at 219, 220 degrees, somewhere in there, then it's ready to be jarred up as syrup. But how do you get from syrup to sugar? Well, you keep boiling, of course. You can see that as I'm boiling here, it's getting very frothy. There's almost like there's no liquid near the bottom. It's just froth. And that's good. That's exactly what we want. And you don't want to stir a lot at this point, especially down into the liquid on the bottom. I'm only stirring just enough to keep it from boiling over the top of the saucepan. And you're just going to keep going with that for a little bit. And watching the way it acts on the spoon. So when it's ready to become sugar, if you have a candy thermometer, your thermometer should read above 165, and then it's ready to become sugar. If you don't have a candy thermometer, what can you do? Well, you'll notice that this is extremely viscous now. It's so viscous, actually, that it's no longer really even boiling well. It more is just popping. Bubbles are popping, as opposed to actually looking like it's boiling. It's writhing and popping. Also, you can notice around the edges and in the middle, there are spots where it looks like it's solidifying even on top. And if I take it on the spoon and I kind of dump it, it comes off clumpy, especially the foam on top, very clumpy. Another thing is I can actually smell a difference. I can't even tell you how to describe that, but when you start doing it, you'll learn to smell the difference. It smells like it's done. So at that point, couldn't pour and hold the camera at the same time. I've gone ahead and done that, and now I'm just going to keep moving this very gently as it cools. I have stirred it, and you can see that as it's cooling, it's solidifying, and there you have maple sugar. It's obviously got some lumps and chunks in it still. That's okay. You can eat it like that as candy, or if you don't want it chunky, you could put it into a food processor or a coffee grinder and get a much more finely granulated sugar. This has been Rachel at Will Forge for Food. Thanks for watching, everybody.